Let's do a quick recap as to where we are. First off, we upload an image, then we extract text from that image through our OCR microservice. Then we can parse that text into almost model-ready dataset. And then, of course, we need to save that dataset to our database. Now, the reason I say it's almost model-ready is because if we look at either our extract example or our utilities, more specifically, go to your utilities inside of the recipe app, where you have this convert QTY units. We see at the very bottom this actual dictionary here and these key value pairs. Now, these key value pairs should actually line directly into the recipe ingredient itself. It's really close, it's just not quite there. So the reason it's not there is because QTY is the actual quantity, which if we look at the recipe ingredient, that's quantity as float. And then, of course, quantity raw should just be simply quantity, just slightly different, but definitely now a little bit more aligned with the model itself. Of course, then we have other here. Now, other is actually taking place of two different fields. That is going to be our name and our description. And the reason I'm having name as an empty string is because that's for sure one that I'm going to need to implement. The description is not necessarily one I will need to implement. So as it stands right now, this other here needs to be actually name and description. Now, the reason I actually have it like this, in the sense that description's now in here, has to do with whatever the length of this ends up being. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, and I'll go ahead and say other txt equals to that. And for a moment, I'll leave it in just like this. Now, of course, this is the remainder text. So going back into our extract example and just looking at an example, if this ends up being really long, if for some reason it's not parsed out very well, then we're going to have an issue potentially where it's going to go over the max length. So since I'm automating this portion, I actually want to ensure that that won't happen. So it's actually fairly straightforward on how to make sure it doesn't happen, is to just enforce how we end up using the variable name and description. Really just by saying if the length of other underscore txt is less than 220, then we'll go ahead and set the name to it. Don't even touch description. And then else or elif the length of other underscore txt is less or rather greater than or equal to 220. Then we'll go ahead and say name is equal to other txt up to 220, and then the description will now get the remainder of that. And we're going to leave it up to our users to decide what they might want to do with either one of those things. And so our field right now, the way the form works that actually implements the recipe ingredient, does not show the description at this point. That's something we can add in later, especially if we start seeing recipes that end up parsing out bigger than 220. I can't imagine that happening very often based on how all this all works, but it's nice to know that we now have a way to prevent it from causing major issues. Okay, so now we have that model-ready dataset, or the ability to parse it into a model-ready dataset. Cool. So now let's go ahead and implement this. Now, to remember back what we did is we have our result example here. This is the extracted text. Then we get original, and then we call those two functions right here. Okay, so by all means, go ahead and copy and paste those things into our view. Now we still need to import everything, right? So we also need to say OG equals to. Well, in this case, I'll just call this variable to extracted instead of just results. Okay, or this should be extracted and original. That's it. Okay, so now this should actually give us the proper data set. And I'll print out what that data set is, or better yet, I'll print out each line in it. So for data in data set, print out that data. Okay, so let's go ahead and import these two. And from .utils, import. And we're going to import each utility function here. There we go. Okay. So now we need to give it a test. Make sure our server is running and go back to image upload. And let's find an image to upload. Of course, I actually have a recipe ingredient image in here. and we'll go ahead and upload it. So what's going to happen after a little bit of time, of course, it's going to actually display every single one of those items. Look at that. Okay, so this is now ready to actually turn it into a model itself, into a recipe ingredient itself. And it's really cool on how we're going to do it. So now we're going to go ahead and say new objects is equal to an empty list. And the data itself, we are going to enrich it with the parent ID, right? So remember how we did the parent ID. We actually grab the recipe itself. And if the parent object is none, then we'll raise HTTP 404, which gives us all the permissions necessary. So I'll go ahead and set something to the parent ID. What is that something? Well, in models.py, we have this foreign key here, which implicitly has another field in here that is for the auto field, which of course is the ID to recipe, the actual model itself. Okay, so that's an implicit field that's in there whenever you do a foreign key, which means we can go back into our view and add that piece into the data. And yet again, we can take a look at it. So I'm going to refresh in this page again, upload again, take a look at it, and we should actually see now, of course, that item being in there, that recipe ID in there, right? And it should always be the same one, at least for this particular item. So now what we can do is we can use the model itself, assuming that it is imported, and it is. We can use that model, and let's go ahead and look for data set. There we go. So we can actually create an instance of it, or almost an instance of it, by putting in that data and unpacking it just like that, and just do new objs.append that recipe ingredient, and then we'll use the recipe ingredient.objects.bulk create of that new list, right? So everything happening right here is not creating anything. This will actually do the creation for us. Now, the coolest thing about this is you can have a lot of data items in there, and it will be as efficient as it can be instead of trying to create them per item in that data set, which I think is great. And now that we've actually updated how we get that data set from our utility function here, it should actually add it into our recipe ingredients well. So yet again, let's give it a shot. First, let's verify our recipe itself. Let's look at it. It has one ingredient, okay? I'm gonna remove that single one. So there's literally no ingredients on here right now. And we'll go ahead and go into the image upload, choose an image, and click upload. So of course it's gonna take a moment. This blue line's gonna go away. We are gonna fix that user interface in a little bit. But now I'm gonna go ahead and jump back into the actual recipe itself. At this point, if I did it correctly, it has all of the ingredients done in here. Pretty cool. This display looks weird, but we'll worry about that later. For now, if we actually go into the edit part, this looks really good. Okay. So there is still a couple issues with what currently exists. And I'll show you that by adding another image. So image upload. Let's go ahead and grab a different image that doesn't yield as good of results. All right, so that other image is great. It almost works flawlessly every time. This one, on the other hand, well, there's some flaws to it. Okay, so if I come in here, I come back into my ingredients, let's even just go to edit, we will see none in my case, right? Because I was doing some testing on this to make sure that it did work. And what we have to do here is we have to update our quantity. We have to allow for it to be blank equals to true and null equals to true. Because every once in a while you get something like squeeze of lime optional, which does not have a quantity and does not have a unit. Now the other thing that I had to solve off the video was capitalization. So if I did £1 here with a capital P, I get pound is not a valid unit of measure. So naturally our system should recognize that uppercase pound is actually a lowercase pound, or at least could be treated that way. The other part is if I actually save the unit being empty, that should also work as well. At this point, yours probably does not do that. So be sure to add the blank equals to true and null equals to true to unit as well as quantity, since we are auto-generating this. Next, what we want to do is update the pound portion. So I'm going to actually search for every instance of ureg with that bracket there. And that's because I know that that unit is most likely needing to be lowercase, right? So I have a few different examples of it, which probably means I should make a method for specifically doing that. But for now, since I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, I'm just going to go ahead and add it in as .lower like that all across the board, just to make sure that whatever I end up doing, the actual unit is going off of some lowered version of the string, because this will remove that as an issue. Okay, so we come back in here. And so now we've solved a couple things. I can have pound as a unit, right? Notice it's still saying none and pound, but it's actually keeping capitalized pound. And then also lowercase pound is fine as well, either way. So it's validating correctly. So that's good. Now, the next part is actually running our migrations. So if you did create those models, and we're going to go ahead and run, source bin /activate, run Python manage.py, make migrations, and Python manage.py migrate. Now, a while ago, when we did create those as required fields, that was meant for our end users. The end users need to put these things in. But the thing is, as we do more research in this, you should realize that squeeze of lime, that as an ingredient item, does not have a quantity, and it does not really have a unit. Squeeze of lime means, well, not a whole lot, to me at least. I mean, somebody reading this that's really good at recipes and whatnot and cooking might be like, oh, a squeeze of lime is about like 1/4 of an ounce, right? Okay, well, that doesn't mean anything to me, so I'm just going to leave it in as is, because this is how we're getting that data. But we now have the ability to upload an image directly in here, or well, almost directly in here, but uploading a recipe ingredient image and adding all that data in here. But what would be better is if I actually did have the upload in here. So that's the next part of this, is actually allowing us to see that image upload right in line with everything else. So let's go into our template right here, into recipes, and our create update here. Okay. So the nice thing about HTMX is that we can actually load in, well, a partial form. So image-upload. This right here, this portion, just the form part, can be used. And if we look at our view, we would see that. So inside of the view itself, we've got these different template names for a reason, right? It's so that I can come in here. I've got my ingredients create method here, or the actual div. And then I can actually do div hx get. Yeah, we'll talk about the actual location in a moment. And then hx-trigger being something like revealed, as in when this div is revealed, then it actually triggers. Okay. So what's the path here? Well, the simplest way is to do something like request.path and then doing /image-upload. Okay, so this will give me that relative path to image upload. Now, I actually don't love this because it's, well, based off of the path itself, and this is just a bit wonky. It'd probably be better to get it off of the object, as in the, something like the object.getImageUpload, right? Image upload URL. So we'll go ahead and implement that. Of course, the object itself is the recipe. So scrolling back up to the recipe, then defining this, of course, returning the reverse statement. And we now need to get the image upload URL name. So going into our URLs, we've got our image upload here. Let's go ahead and give it a name. And simply being image upload, or let's say recipe ingredient image upload. Okay, so kind of a long name in there, but now we can use that, and it gives us the ability to use HTMX to enrich a really cool thing. So we hit edit in here. Make sure we save everything, and this is the correct one. It looks like it is. And we've got the ID of parent. Let's go back into our model. ID is self.id. Did we call it anything different? We might have renamed the variable something else. If we did, parent ID. Back into our model. Keyword args is parent ID. Okay, so going back into our edit. And we scroll down a bit. Hey, what do you know? There is the ability to add an ingredient and upload an image. So what I actually want to do is upload it, obviously, through the image itself, but I need to change a couple things. First off, the form, the upload form, which is this right here, I want to give a different label to the image field itself. And we're just going to simply say labels equals to a dictionary. Grab the field we want to use, and we'll go ahead and say extract via image upload. Something like that. Next, I want to actually change this form to where if the file changes, then it's going to upload automatically. So this is going back into our partials here, image upload form. And something we can do here is we can change the trigger to being, something like hx-trigger. And we can call change from hashtag ID underscore image. Okay. So this, of course, is going to be related to the field in here of image. Maybe that is obvious, maybe it's not. But I'll also go ahead and add in some styles in here of display being none to the progress bar, as well as the submit button. Okay. And what I will do is I'll add in the div class of HTMX indicator and just say loading now. Okay, so we definitely need to see where I got this part from. But the idea is there is triggers built into HTMX for a change event. And then you can also declare where it's being changed, like some item that's being changed. And the ID underscore image, well, you can know that that is the actual ID from how Django's built, or we can investigate the actual form itself. So you could inspect in here into the no file chosen, and you'll see the actual HTML ID is right there. So the ID itself is ID underscore image. Cool. So now when I actually select this, what I should see is I hit the ingredients, and now it's showing me loading, which is actually really, really nice. Okay, so that also might mean that we want to do the opposite of the HTMX indicator locator for the field itself, which if we do the opposite, that's inverted. And that's going to be just for the form itself, so class being equal to that. There we go. And come back in here. There's that image. And we can add in some ingredients. Now it's loading. And perhaps this isn't the best location for that specific thing. But if I refresh the page, it should load. Okay, it should load up those things. Which I don't want to refresh the page. So, or at least not refresh it in this manner. I don't want to force the refresh. I want it to just happen. And so going back to our view, pretty much the final step that we want to do here with this particular form is we actually just want to return, after all this is said and done, we want to return a response. So headers, well, we've actually already seen this one. So if we search on this view, we've got this headers redirects success URL and all that. So that's actually what I want to do, including the other URL. Okay, so if we go back into that one, now I'm going to paste this in here. So the success URL, we could go back to the recipes, or we could just, essentially go back to the parent objects get absolute URL. So I don't need to reverse anything. I should just do parent object get absolute URL. And we should probably verify that that's where we want it to go. So get absolute URL, detail view, or maybe the edit view, because I'm most likely that's where I'm going to be putting this if I was calling it. Okay, and then this success URL, oops, we should have put it like that. And there we go. And for simplicity purposes, I just deleted all recipes. So I'll go ahead and say, tacos here, and then new tacos. We'll go ahead and save it and edit. Now we'll go ahead and add these images. Okay. So in the case of actually adding ingredients via image, the item has to exist in the database. But here we go. That's a simple way to just really extract something and then turn it into this. Like, I think it's actually pretty cool. So if we go back into the recipes themselves and we add another recipe, let's go and do tacos 2, Takis 2, hit save, go back to edit it, add the ingredients from upload, just let it run, gives a little bit of time, but then we have brand new ingredient with these recipes. Cool. I really, really like how this is working out. And the other thing is, after you do that, if whoever the user would be, is now they'd have the opportunity to change any of these recipes as they see fit, right? Or remove them, right? So if you want this squeeze of lime, if you didn't want it to be squeeze of lime, you could just say lime and, 1/4 of an ounce, and just leave in the string of optional. You can hit save, and boom, now that user can do that. It's a little bit closer to maybe what they might want to see out of an ingredient. But it also allows for just making this data better too, because if you end up finding out that a squeeze of lime almost always means 1/4 an ounce, then maybe when they go to edit it or add it, in the long run, maybe you'd start suggesting that it should just be 1/4 of an ounce or something like that. And I have no idea if you'd consider a squeeze of lime 1/4 of an ounce. It's just a guess, but the data would tell us over time.